This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I am speaking with author Dr. Louise Ells. Louise is the author of Lies I Told My Sister, published in 2024 by Latitude 46 Publishing, which we will be talking about today. Louise was born and raised in Northeastern Ontario. After years of travel, she moved to Cambridge, England, where she earned her PhD in creative writing. She teaches at universities and colleges in England and Canada, and currently lives north of Toronto, where she can often be found in her library, surrounded by books and snuggled up with her cats, which sounds like the perfect life. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much. I am absolutely delighted to be here. This is such a treat. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, before we got started here recording, I was telling Louise all sorts of things and gushing like a mad woman about how much I love this book. But first, let me say that I received an ARC from Halle at River Street Writing, and I immediately, when I started reading it, I was telling Louise, I just felt like this is what good writing is. This is when someone has their craft down really well. Immediately, the opening of the story really resonated with me, as well the whole story, because I also told her that I think there were about 3 times in the book where I just kind of freaked a little bit and felt like she was eavesdropping on my family life because it was so real. And I really honestly can't remember another book that hit me so much, like such a gut punch of how I just felt it was my life on paper. So kudos for writing an absolutely brilliant novel. And I want to, for those of you who have yet to read it, because everyone should read it, can you tell us about Lies I Told My Sister?
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Compliments indeed. Thank you. So it is a story about two sisters and their relationship, the ups and the downs. But it's also really an exploration of when saying nothing becomes a lie. Where is the line, between a lie of omission and a lie of commission? The protagonist, Lily, is the older of the sisters. Ironically, she places a lot of importance on shared memories, and yet she is unable to share her own memories or her life story with the people she loves most in the world. So she has a fear of being alone with no shared memories, and yet she manages to create a life where she is very much alone.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that just hit me. Yeah. Your novel tells a story of the past, and I said present, so, but it's not quite present, but that sort of, well, past and current time period. I'm saying this very poorly, but you know what I'm saying. And so, can you tell us a little bit about your writing process in crafting those two time periods? Because I wondered if you, uh, the way the book starts out, it is one day in the life of Rose in that moment, right? So I wondered, and it kind of goes back and forth. And so, did you write all of that story in the hospital first and then fill in the other stuff, or how did you write it? Is my question. Like, what was the writing process?
That is a great question. So the answer to your question briefly is no. I didn't write the parts separately. It was really challenging, actually, for me to get the form and the structure correct. So the very first draft was chronological, starting in the summer of 76 and everything that happens then, and then moving forward. And it was okay, but only just barely okay. So then, sort of second draft, I made sure that it wasn't chronological, and I worked towards what I considered the big reveal. But it was too clunky and it was too confusing. And by that point, I knew the characters so well and I knew what was going on in their lives. But my beta readers said, this isn't working, Louise. So eventually, I think my third or fourth draft, I had a mentor, Pamela Malloy, and she said, why don't you pull all the hospital bits and make that the now of the story and then fragment the rest. And that was like the big light bulb. So thank you to Pamela for reminding me that when we are somewhere still and waiting and thinking, our memories come back in such odd fragments. They never come back in chronological order. We think about something and then something else, and that's how Lily thinks.
Wow, because that's exactly what I loved about it, because I was telling you before, this book reads like real life. Even and I was saying you kind of mentioned a couple of name or a name, at least one name at the beginning that I went, "Wait a minute, who is this?" And then I thought, just calm down, just keep reading the book. You know, I didn't find it, but and then it's revealed, but not in that annoying way that sometimes can happen. It's the way we would naturally think in our minds about a person, we would think about their name. We wouldn't define who they are in that moment in our mind. We would just think of that person, right? So I thought that was really, really beautifully done. And that's fascinating that you found, I mean, that it was so difficult because it's really the unfolding of the story is so amazing that it's funny that it started out sort of wonky, but that you pulled it together, I guess, in that whole process.
I'm glad it pulled together so well. By the time I was reading the final draft, I was not even quite sure whether it was working or not. So I'm really glad it does.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody. I mean, it really does work so beautifully. And that's one of the things when we talked about the questions I was going to ask today. I said they're kind of basic questions because they're so in my mind, there are so many little reveals along the way that I don't want to have any spoilers whatsoever. I can just tell you, please read the story because you will love it. I'm pretty confident you will love it as much as I did. But anyway, let's go to our next question. Now, this is kind of a little maybe tougher question to ask, but I looked at your website and I encourage everyone to go to your website, which we will link to in the show notes. You've got some short fiction there and some poetry there that will kick your butt. It is so deeply emotional and heartbreaking and compelling. Just amazing story. So I encourage everyone to take a look at Louise's website. But in reading the works, I realized then that some of Lies seems to be your story. And I without going into a lot of detail for spoilers or anything, but can you tell us how you married that fact and fiction? And I because I've always wondered if authors some authors will say, I never put personal stuff in my stories. I just make everything up. And then other people obviously pull from their lives. So how do you balance that?
That is a really good question and difficult to answer because I think on the surface, both it's 100% true and 100% fiction. So I gave Lily my greatest fear. So Lily and I share our greatest fear of losing our sister. And and then I sorry, excuse me, and then I sort of fictionalized everything else. So I am definitely not Lily, and Rose is definitely not my sister, and there's some huge differences. Our father was not an underachieving alcoholic. He was a research scientist with a PhD and Kroll Award winner. But I love it when someone says that it sounds so much like you. Something else I pulled from my life was that my second husband and I were married in 2012, and then in the spring of 2013, he was diagnosed with MCI, minor cognitive impairment, and that later became early onset dementia. So it just seemed that Lily was so worried about losing shared memories with people, and then her second husband is going to lose all the memories they share.
And that is such a real thing in the world, right? Especially, I think as you get older, you recognize that more. And losing those, losing somebody who has shared memory is just, yeah, I feel that every day. I lost my dad last year. My mother is older. And I always tell people all those questions that you think that you want to ask, you think, "Oh, someday I'm gonna ask these questions," and then you don't ask the questions, and then it's too late, and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I really wish I had asked those questions."
Yeah, conversations you can never have that you've missed having.
Yeah, exactly. Lies of omission have always fascinated me because every family has them. I just have to say that my grandmother, after she passed, my mother discovered some paperwork that my grandmother had divorced my grandfather, had a child out of wedlock that she put up for adoption, and no one in the family ever told my mother. So she went back and said to her two older sisters, "What the heck?" And they were like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Mama had a baby and blah, blah, blah." My mother was about 11 years younger than the others because my grandfather also had been in Jackson Prison in Michigan for bootlegging. So when he was gone, that's why there's a big gap in the years of my between my mom and her siblings. And so anyway, it's a family story that we kind of love to tell because it's so outrageous that my mother didn't know this until she was probably in her 50s or something. And so lies of omission are fascinating to me. So what prompted you to write about them, and did you learn anything new about that in crafting this novel?
Absolutely. They've always fascinated me too. I think when I was a child, as a middle sister, I took on, or I feel that I took on the role of peacekeeper. And one of the ways I found to keep peace was to not share things with either my sisters or my parents, and just keeping quiet was sometimes the best course of action. Then my first marriage, unfortunately, was unhappy and unhealthy, and my coping mechanism when dealing with his compulsive lying was to keep quiet myself. After that marriage ended, I swore no more lies, full disclosure all the time. However, when my second husband was diagnosed with early onset, I realized or discovered or was taught that sometimes lying to someone with dementia is actually the kinder of the two choices. For example, after his parents died, at one point we were in a shop and he said, "Oh, I really want to buy this t-shirt for my dad." And it was just kinder to say, "Oh yeah, your dad would love that t-shirt. Let's buy it for him," rather than reminding him yet again that his father had passed.
That actually happened with my dad when he had mild dementia at the end. And he would say things that, clearly in that same type of vein. And I always, just like you did, sort of agreed and just went along with it. And my brother would often, or others in the family, would correct him. And I had done a little bit of research on sort of how to work with people, how to love people who with dementia and stuff. So I kind of knew just to go along with it because he'll forget about it. He won't remember that he asked me to go do this or that for whatever reason. And it just made it was easy for me to do it for him, right?
Yes, you have to, I think, put yourself into their world rather than trying to drag them back into your world.
Oh, beautifully said. And now my other question though is when you said that, you know, in that first marriage, you were kind of just or in the family and then in your first marriage kind of not revealing yourself so much. And then you said then you decided you just weren't going to sort of tell those lies of omission, right? But how easy or hard was that transition? If that's how you'd been, that's how you grew up and that's how you were, how did you make that transition into saying, "I'm going to be more candid"?
It has and continues to be a real challenge for me. I am so used to saying nothing that I really have to think about. I have to think about it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm super lucky in that I live in Canada. We see mental health challenges as health challenges. So I've had a great therapist who has helped me sort of become better at sharing my truth and sharing my story.
Yeah, because I'm kind of in my family, I'm the oldest daughter but middle child, and it's so funny because I tell everything. Like I don't hold anything back. I mean like personal stuff. Like I'll just tell people stuff because to me, I always think if you expose something to the light, it's easier to navigate it going forward, but maybe not everybody appreciates that about me. So sometimes I have to remember nobody care. Like don't tell everybody your stuff. Just shut up already. So yeah. Okay. My next question is really and this is funny. I've asked authors this question before and I'm always fascinated by the answer. So no pressure on you in terms of what your answer is, but I'll tell you afterwards about one author. But anyway, What would you like readers to take away from Lies?
I love this question. I thought about it for a long time. I think I would like my students will laugh if they listen to this because I am always saying, and I know I say it too often, that one of the purposes of fiction in my mind is discovering what it means to be human, which is so non academic to say. But I think if anyone reads my novel and discovers something in it which becomes an epiphany or a clarification or a moment of aha, or I didn't know anyone else felt that way, or oh, what would I have done in that circumstance, or how would I have reacted, then that would be wonderful. Of course, I hope that they fall in love with Lily and Rose, that they enjoy, that they're entertained, that possibly the novel will bring them comfort in some ways. And then maybe I don't want to have a moral or a meaning particularly, but if people think about the power of the stories we tell, real or imagined, true or false, possibly even the stories we tell ourselves and what we believe and how that affects our lives, then yeah, it would be nice to make people think just for a minute.
Yeah, I think that's the most powerful part of this is to see Rose and Lily's relationship over time and those things that Lily couldn't talk about, right? And that how maybe it could have changed their relationship and made them not go through those moments of estrangement, right?
Yeah,
So it's just, I think it was a beautiful way to tell that story. And I do think people can get something out of it in that way because, that's the thing about families. On the outside, they all look shiny and wonderful. And on the inside, every family goes through some level of this. And
yeah.
that's why the book speaks to all of us.
May I say one thing
Sure.
to that? So my family does have one sister who chose to leave, so totally estranged for I think the last time I saw her was 1999. And for a long time we felt guilty or broken or for whatever reason we didn't tell people. It was just like this big family secret. And then as soon as I thought, well, this is ridiculous, when people say, when did you last see her? It started to be, oh, 5 years ago.
Mhm.
But as soon as I started speaking about it, so many families have an uncle or a brother or a grandparent or a sibling who is estranged. It's just not as uncommon as I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had that. My younger brother, was estranged from the family for probably 10 years before and he passed last year, and that's the thing. I agree with you. It's like when you tell somebody that, then you find out from others, and they're saying now a lot of younger people are going no contact with their parents, and I've read a little bit about this, and as painful as it is, sometimes you just think it's necessary. You can't fault anybody for the decisions they make because you just don't know what's going on the inside.
Absolutely. You
Yeah,
never know. We never know. Yeah, we
yeah.
barely know what's going on in our own lives, let alone anyone else's.
Exactly, I agree, I agree on that. Now, one of the things you and I talked about briefly before we, started, the actual recording was and I just wanna touch on it briefly and just get your sense of, there's the whole storyline right now about Neil Gaiman and Alice Munro and others. And I just wanted to get your sense of, and this is totally off the cuff, so your sense of how do we separate the artist from the art, or do we? How are you feeling about all of this current news?
The Alice Munro story really hit me hard because I spent 4 years with comparing her stories in Dear Life, the last of her collections. I read and reread. I pretty much had that book memorized by the time I sat my Viva. And I almost felt as if I knew her. Because I was reading out loud and seeing where she took a breath and where she then changed a comma in a story and didn't take the breath or took a different breath. Of course, I didn't know her at all. I just knew her work. but she was so beloved in Canada and around the world. It was interesting that I had started my PhD and very few people had heard of her, and then she won the Nobel Prize, and suddenly it was like, "Oh, Louise, you're right on trend." And I thought, "Oh, first time in my life." So I had known she was living with dementia. It wasn't a surprise. She actually died on my birthday last year,
Oh.
so I will never forget her death date. But then when the story broke, it just it crushed me in so many ways that she could have. I mean, we'll never know the full story. I don't know the full story. It is my suspicion that if the husband was that abusive towards Monroe's daughter, he was probably abusive towards Monroe. So I don't know how she was faring, but on the surface, it would seem that she put the husband ahead of the daughter. I don't have children. I can't ever imagine doing that. But as we've just said, we don't know. We don't know what's going on inside people's lives. But it has fascinated me to look at the rereading of all her work now through the lens of her personal life. So biographical and reader response.
Do you see things that now that you know a little bit of the story, whatever amount we can know of the story, does it how does it resonate now, like her works for you?
Oh, it's completely different. One of the stories that was oft has often been quoted as Vandals. And I read it before I knew, and then reading it again, it's so difficult to not see some of what may have been her truth in that story. So the separation, as you said, separating the art from the artist, so difficult, so challenging. And yet, if I know nothing about an artist and I love their art, does that make me in some way culpable?
So do you still have the same feeling toward her work? I mean, you obviously, if this was your PhD, you obviously loved her work. You got so much. I mean, you did a deeper dive than all of us listening, most likely, right? So does it change how you feel toward her and her writing? Did it change that where you feel like I've lost something in this?
Oh, absolutely. It was a huge loss. It was, yes, a huge. It felt like a death almost, and she might have done something that was monstrous. I don't want to say she might have. She clearly did. I'm not. She clearly did things that were monstrous, but her writing is still the words on the page. My understanding of the words on the page have changed, but the words on the page themselves have not changed. So everything I loved about a short story before I knew, I still love. I'm just struggling because I'm seeing it through a different lens now.
And in teaching at the university level, were you teaching her works before? Will you continue to teach her works?
I was teaching them. I'm taking a step back until I had decide how or what I would do differently. So this year I'm not teaching any Monroe. No.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I mean, like I said, that was really off the cuff, but I wanted to get your take on that because as a writer, that I think there's, and especially as someone a PhD who teaches it as well, I wanted to kind of get your sense of that. Thank you for sharing that. Now, the other thing that we love to do on the podcast is we love to ask authors for any recommendations for our listeners. So if you're currently reading something you'd like to share or something that you've read and loved that you think we all should read, let us know.
I would love to do that. And I know this is a podcast, but I'm going to hold up the books so
No,
you
we love
can
that.
see
I
them.
love that personally. Yep. Let me see it.
I've kind of cheated here. One of the courses I'm teaching at the moment is Contemporary Canadian Lit. So I spent the fall whittling down an impossible reading list to just 5 books. And what I'm trying to do is introduce my students to authors they might otherwise not have met and trying to mix genres. So I have some poetry and I have a murder mystery, but that appears in the same book. Carrie Clare's Waiting for a Star to Fall is both plot driven and character driven. It's both mainstream slash book club fiction and literary fiction. Amazing. Two books of essays. One, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, I think you've read.
I think I haven't read it, but I think Tara has read it. Yeah.
Okay. And Ariel Gordon's first of her trilogy. This is called Treed. The second is called Fungal. That just came out this fall.
Fungal, I think, is the one Tara read. I think so. Yeah.
So it is, it's going in my essays, but also memoir, also psychogeography. It's just a fabulous combination.
Yeah.
And then we have a play text called Cottagers and Indians, which is both heartbreaking and hilariously funny.
Yeah, we love Drew Hayden Taylor on this
Yeah.
podcast. We love him. Yes.
And then Death of Persephone by Yvonne Blomer. And this is the murder mystery written in poetry,
Oh.
which is so good. And of course, it's also a retelling.
Yeah. Oh
So
my gosh.
you could do worse than read those 5 books.
Wow, those are great titles for us to share. I mean, you really went in a direction that I just wasn't expecting because I know Tara's read some or knows the authors as well, but oh my gosh, those are some great recommendations. Now, is there anything so when you read, do you read for sort of work or do you read for fun and relaxation? Like what's your personal reading style?
All over the place. I usually have about 6 books on the go at once, which is ridiculous. Collections of short stories, I find I read with a pen because I'm always underlining sentences that just take my breath away or things that are working so well. So I read short stories, I love them, but I'm always thinking about how they've been written. I read a lot of murder mysteries and they're fabulous. And if you ask me 2 days later what happened, I can barely even tell you.
Exactly. Yep. Been there, done that.
Sometimes I immerse myself in happily ever romance because I just want to know that girl gets girl and they live happily ever after. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all do that?
Exactly. I love it.
And my sister gives me poetry collections for Christmas every year, and she just gets it spot on. And so I sort of have the growing pile by my bed, and I will often dip into them. I read them cover to cover, but then I'll dip back in to read a poem as and when I feel.
Is there a poet right now that maybe we don't know that much about that you've read that you really would just like to share their name for us to look at some titles that they've written?
Look at Joy Williams. I think she's an American. I think I should have put the book beside me. The first line of the first poem in the collection my sister gave me this year is first we have to let it, I'll paraphrase.
Yeah.
First we have to let go of the lives that we aren't living, that we wish we were living or something. And it was so like, oh yeah.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that. I'll look into that again. I'll put that in the show notes. So thank you. All right. Well, that's beautiful. Now, I always do feel bad asking this question, especially after someone's coming on that is just now has published a book and they're on the road talking about it and letting us all know about it. But are you currently working on anything that we have to look forward to in the future?
Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. And I hope you'll look forward to it in the future. Yes, I am. I'm working on something at the moment. I don't yet have an elevator pitch because I'm still feeling into my way about what it's really about. In the way that with Lies, first it was my dementia novel, then it was my sister's novel, then it was my ghost sister's novel, and so I keep changing. But it is dual point of view, 2 women with a connection to each other that only one is aware of.
Ooh.
It's set during COVID, and I'm not sure if that's because I started writing it during COVID or if COVID is actually really important to the novel. So I'm still feeling that out. One of the women tries so hard to do the correct thing, but she never quite gets it right. And the other woman, I better not
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't say thing. Don't say thing. I'm loving
So
this.
their lives are intersecting in the present, which is the now of the novel, but their stories intersected in the past. As I said, unbeknownst to one. And my friends will all laugh, but what a surprise. It turns out I'm exploring loss, how to say goodbye, how to say sorry, and how to make peace with our mistakes and poor choices and regrets.
You know what? That's real life. That is what we all live. So I think that sounds fabulous. And Louise, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really loved Lies I Told My Sister. I want everyone to go out, pick up a copy, read it, let me know what you think. And I hope that when the next book comes out that you will come back and chat with us again.
Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.